Hello and welcome back to A Moment of Focus, your go-to compliance podcast where we'll continue to bring you the latest and greatest compliance updates and available resources. I'm your host, Caleb Diaz. Now let's talk compliance. All right, it is the end of the month, so you know what that means? It's cybersecurity roundup time, and we are back again with Tom DeMeo from PKF O'Connor Davies to give you all a little extra cybersecurity help. So let's cut to the chase. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Caleb. How you doing?
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you, Tom. So I had a chance to read your Cyber Roundup for October, and I have to say it was a really eye-opening article to read about all these different attacks on industries from healthcare to education. It really showed that cybercrime is indiscriminate in regards to who it will attack and when it's going to attack. In the article, you gave some really good takeaways. Can you maybe give a brief overview of what those takeaways were?
Absolutely. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? When it comes to the cyber actors, one thing they certainly do not do is discriminate, regardless of industry, regardless of company size, they really do target each and every one of us, personally and professionally. And, when you look at really last month and, the overwhelming theme, which was kind of incredible for September, was there was just so many ransomware events. I mean, to the point where, we almost started running out of room to write because it was just so many affected entities out there with ransomware, from your healthcare entities to your school districts. School districts really got hit heavy last month, to, a global insurance brokerage firm, Arthur J. Gallagher. So, again, it kind of shows that regardless of size, they have a way of getting in. And, yes, you look at a company like Arthur J. Gallagher, a global insurance company, which clearly probably had, teams and a lot of resources, but things do happen, and I think one of the things too, outside of even just the ransomware spectrum, we often think of, all these websites that we interact with, but I think sometimes we don't think of the ramifications of the website we're interacting with, or really that someone else is collecting our data. And the key point there, in one of the bullets is we talk about this online database that really had all this information from dating websites, something that, people go and flock to for, social interaction. But at the same time, when we're putting it out there, you always kind of have to have that reservation of, all right, well, if I'm putting it out there, who else could potentially see it? So, I think these incidents, as scary as they are, they do serve as reminders, as we're interacting with all these different services.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more important now more than ever to realize that all this data that we have out in the cloud, whether it be from apps on our phone or data from work, can be so susceptible to attack, especially in this new cybersecurity landscape that we're trying to navigate right now. This kind of segues into the second article that you sent, which was Cybersecurity, Where Do We Go From Here? This article reflected on the past 6 months of the pandemic and how the IT and cybersecurity landscape has changed over this time. Tom, could you give us your high-level overview and insight as to what this article is about?
Absolutely. So, I'm a big believer in order to kind of sometimes know where you need to go, you need to reflect on where you've been. And, I think in light of the pandemic and in the past 6, 7 months, we've really reached a pivotal point in really the cybersecurity, information security, and even the tech land space. I think things were leading up that were already starting to transition before the pandemic, but I think this really accelerated a lot of movement, which introduces new risk. So when we think about where we are now and where we need to go, I tried to offer just some key tips, again, high level stuff here, to help any company, especially investment advisors, think about the key points so that when they do move forward, they do have a clear direction, right? And I kind of broke this down into one, thinking about your perspective, shifting it to the endpoints, knowing your data, valuing your data, communicating, and even just maintaining visibility. The last bullet point is not so much technical as it is, the fact that frauds will occur. And, with people not necessarily being supervised the way they were or the way they were accustomed to, and in light of different circumstances and pressures that people might be under, things may happen. So you don't want to lose sight of your technology as well as you don't want to lose sight of your people.
Those were really good points. Thank you, Tom. You know, as I was reading the articles, I noticed that the reported attacks were happening on different industries from healthcare to education. It just really goes to show that every industry is vulnerable, not just the financial industry. And this kind of got me wondering, since a lot of firms outsource many different services to third parties, such as payroll or document disposal, would you say that now more than ever is a good time for firms to really focus on third party due diligence to ensure the safety of their data as well as their clients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even if you look at the OC and their, their bullet points on what they expect and what they want from the cybersecurity footprint, and really any regulation at this point, even independent of OC, third-party due diligence is fundamentally going to be key. The reality is that because we are shifting and kind of unhinging from our own internal control and relying on all these third parties and giving our data out, we have to have a sound position in place to make sure that whoever we're giving our data to, they are acting responsibly. I always say, when we're using a third party, we're not transferring responsibility as much as we are delegating a task. And just like any task that's being delegated, you're responsible for managing and monitoring and making sure that task is done to your expectations. And third-party due diligence is really key to that whole concept. And especially with smaller investment advisors, one of the things that I often see is that they're very, they might look at their bigger players for their portfolio managements and things like that, but they sometimes forget that their IT managed service provider is also a key component of that third-party risk. And what you've seen in the past year and a half really is that cyber criminals have actively targeted IT managed service providers because, let's face it, they have access to a lot of different clients. So get to one, you get many. So from a cyber criminal standpoint, it makes perfect sense. So my advice there is, if you are using an IT managed service provider, in addition to your other third-party due diligence, don't forget about your IT managed service provider. Don't let them be the weak link in the chain.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The more that firms are outsourcing tasks to certain service providers, the more they really need to ensure that what is being outsourced and the data that is flowing out of the firm and to these providers is really locked up and tight so that it does not get leaked.
Absolutely. I was working with a client yesterday, as a matter of fact, and typically what we will do if they have an IT managed service provider is we will, issue them a questionnaire, and we're going to ask the questions on behalf of the client. And what we identified was that particular service provider was using the same exact account and password across every one of their clients. Now, from a risk standpoint, yes, our client could have invested all this money in security and done all these great things, but now they become at the mercy of the other clients that this provider has. If they have poor security and they get access to those passwords at some other company, it becomes a vector to that company. And that's what I talk about, the chain. Because there's a lot of connectivity and there's a lot of potential movement, but that's just a prime example of the risk that a service provider could introduce.
Yeah, that's a good point. You have one weak link in the chain and the whole chain can break. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciated it. I know our clients will too. We'll be talking to you soon.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, that is all for today's episode. Make sure to check out the links below for articles that we mentioned in today's podcast. And then make sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, check out our blog. And if you're a Focus One client, your -7 dashboard. And just as a reminder, Tom is offering up his services at a 15% discount to Focus One clients. So if you need any extra guidance on cybersecurity or IT, make sure to give him a call. From all of us here at Focus One, have a great weekend and stay compliant.